Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks at our usual time of 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I'm speaking to you here from Stirling in episode 2 of our coverage of the Alba Party's National Council. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by an industry expert in the field of oil and gas, but before we join him, let's take a look at the highlights from last week's show and our National Council speakers from Stirling.
Ethics doesn't care what flag you wave. It cares that we hold the dignity of all human life. And by that standard, we must condemn violence against civilians wherever it comes from.
Protecting women's rights is fundamental to the fair and equal independent Scotland we all want to see without delay. The Scottish Government have an opportunity to show their leadership and ensure the equality legislation is correctly applied. Delegates, please support this motion.
Labour supporting Daily Record at the election had a front page which said, "Vote for a Labour government with Scotland at its beating heart." Well, tell that to the 400 workers at Grangemouth who have been cast aside. Tell that to the people of Falkirk and Grangemouth who have been betrayed. And tell that to the taxi drivers, the hairdressers, the small businesses who are now suffering as a result of the economic vandalism, to use the phrase coined by the General Secretary of Unite, the economic vandalism that has been foisted on those communities.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ioniser restructures and alkalises water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I'm delighted to be joined by our candidate for the Cromarty Firth by-election taking place this coming Thursday, Steve Chisholm. Steve Chisholm, welcome to Scotland Speaks.
Hi Taz, thanks for having me today.
Delighted to have you on the show. Now, you have been previously interviewed by your good friend, the late Alex Salmond, when you discussed much about what's happening in oil and gas industry. You say yourself you're a perfect example of the transition from oil and gas to renewable energy. But before we get to that, I wonder if we can speak at some length on your dear friend, our dear friend, Alex Salmond, whom you've known since 1997, and some thoughts and reflections on him, as we always like to do in the show.
Yeah, no, I mean, where do you start with Alex? I mean, I got to know him first through very personal circumstances, nothing to do with politics. Our family, my cousin's husband had sadly been one of the crew lost on the fishing boat Sapphire that had sunk off Peterhead, and I was involved heavily working the underwater industry around that time, had experience of it, and family asked me to reach out to Alex to offer some industry help and advice in terms of trying to locate and recover the vessel and really try and bring the bodies of those loved ones back for decent burial ashore. So that was my first experience of Alex. I remember saying to my family, like, he'll not be wanting to speak to me, he'll be busy doing what he's doing. Last thing he's going to do is, come back to me. But anyway, after a wee bit of family pressure, I picked up the phone, phoned his office in Peterhead. It took him 10 minutes to phone me back in person. And in the months that followed, I was with him for many weeks, night and day, as he tirelessly campaigned to raise funds to pay for that recovery operation, to spend time with the families, understanding their wishes. He was adamant that the only things that would be done would be things that met 100% with the wishes of the families. And of course, as a project, it went through ups and downs. It was, it was a project that if you were doing it commercially, you would never ever attempt to do it in the depths of a Scottish winter. But of course, he wanted to do it for the families. And I saw a side to him that those in politics didn't see. He wasn't the politician with the quick quip. He wasn't the cocky jockey that we saw in Westminster or around the campaign trails. He was just a guy sometimes moved to tears with pure frustration that he couldn't deliver the families what they wanted as quickly as they would like things to happen, and he went through huge ups and downs. So that was my first exposure of him, really. Alex, the person, a person just deeply committed to people and helping people. And of course, from that, the relationship with politics, our joint love of independence, all these things followed. But for me first, it was Alex, this compassionate, caring person that behind the scenes in his private moment just wanted to do good for people.
And Steve, he told that story on many occasions when I was with him, and each time, without fail, with tears in his eyes, the genuine sentiment he had for doing right for the families involved and the efforts to get the money required to raise the Sapphire meant so much to him. And he said on many an occasion, and even publicly, that when he's asked the question at the pearly gates, he wants to be able to say, which he will, that he did good by the families.
Yeah, you're gonna find me tearing up as well in a minute, because it's just something that had to be done. We were honoured and privileged to be invited to the funerals of those, and we came to recognise just firsthand how much that had meant to the families. But it's a memory that no matter how many decades pass will just live with you as something that needed to be done, and he stood up and he led the doing of it. I
should say it was one of the things, many things he'd planned to do but couldn't complete, was to actually write a book about everything that happened around that time, around the Sapphire. Maybe in coming weeks and months, Steve, it's something you might consider doing in his honour, perhaps. I'm sorry to throw this on you, but in the conversation it's come up. But I do know you wanted to document around that time.
No, there's a real story to be told there, a story of personal tragedy, a story of overcoming difficulties, a story of a technical challenge that really shouldn't have been achieved, but it was. And of course, there is a fantastic story there to tell. Of course, would need to be told with real compassion and with the permission of the families that were involved. But what a story there would be there to tell.
Indeed, Steve. Now let's move to your relationship which further developed with Alex in terms of the industry in which you're involved. Just talk me through a bit about what you do.
So I work for an energy services company. It's one of the most successful in Scotland, led by a very well-known serial entrepreneur, successful businessman that was also considered Alex a friend. And through that, really came to know Alex as somebody that really wanted to champion the reindustrialisation of Scotland. He really regretted the fact that our shipbuilding, our oil and gas fabrication industries all died away over the passage of time, suffering from real neglect. And we've talked about that a lot within the party. But he really wanted to see us not making the same mistakes we did with oil and gas, where all that potential use of our resources, the opportunity to get manufacturing at scale back wasn't wasted. And he saw the incoming green energy revolution, that renewables opportunity, as being a real opportunity to build new factories to create thousands of manufacturing jobs and basically recreate the skills and the heavy industry that we were so famous for in the past.
We're here at National Council, Steve, and we've just heard from you two excellent speeches on the future of oil and gas and indeed on Ferguson's. Let's look at some of those clips.
It's a myth, the demise of oil and gas. Oil and gas has got decades left. Just consider that some of the fields that were abandoned a few years ago are actually now being redeveloped. The Buchan field was cut up into pieces in Shetland, and now it's being redeveloped with new technologies, because year on year innovations are made that make even more oil and gas recoverable. And not only are we seeing more development from the historic fields, there are still elephant-sized new discoveries being made. Why on earth would we turn our back on that bounty only to rely on more imported gas and hydrocarbon products coming in? It's just a total nonsense. And it talks to the absolute negativity of all that's bad about the green agenda, which doesn't provide for any sort of just transition. Because for a just transition, you need to move slowly and gradually away from one type of industry to another, not to have a knife edge where we actually abandon oil and gas. Oil and gas has historically worked in 7-year cycles, and at the end of every 7-year cycle in a demise, we would see hundreds of people leave the industry, never to come back again. And that's exactly what's going to happen if there isn't a strong voice to stand up for the oil and gas and hydrocarbon side. Otherwise, the supply chain companies, the people that work in it, they're simply not going to be there to transition into the renewable work that's coming. What was once a shipbuilding industry, the pride of the world, that was respected by every shipfaring nation around the globe, has become a poster child for incompetence and lack of capability. And it's not because the welders can't weld and the painters can't paint. They're as good as anyone on this planet, but they're being mismanaged, and it has to stop. And that's why people like Jim McCall and the like, with vision, with capability, with competence, need to be put back in place, because the future opportunity is huge. It's there for ferries, for servicing offshore wind farms. The UK and Europe need 160 boats. That's right, 160. And all of them could be built here in Scotland, not just with the misused Ferguson yard, but what about the disgrace of Inch Green being kept mothballed and empty to fulfil a future dream for luxury houses and a marina to fill Peelport's pockets, when it could be building 2 of these vessels at a time in their dry dock? What a disgrace of a national asset, a total waste. So please, let's wake up, let's hold government to account here in Scotland, and let's start allowing our great shipbuilding workers and their families of the future to do what they do best. Thank you.
Steve, talk me through. You've spoken very passionately with in-depth knowledge on the future of oil and gas. Let's talk me through some of that, and then let's turn to the future of shipbuilding in Ferguson's.
So in oil and gas, as competent it is and as essential that we move to green sources of energy that are good for the planet, provide us with energy security. And I think in many respects it's energy security that's the bigger prize here. We talk a lot about net zero, and that's clearly very important in terms of climate change. But what we've seen through the war in Ukraine is the essential need for energy security in our country. And of course that needs to be a balanced mix. Now, it just seems perverse and wrong that we would be depriving ourselves of the revenue, of the jobs and the security that comes from having our own oil and gas production here from the North Sea. And of course tragic that we've lost Grangemouth, our only refinery in Scotland, just because enough wasn't done to save it. But the reality is that oil and gas isn't finished. There's still decades worth of oil production left. And that's there for 2 reasons. We're finding very large elephant-sized finds, whether it's gas or oil, still through exploration. So it's crazy that we would stop exploration and not grant any more new licenses, because big finds are still being made. The other thing that's there is that technology changes almost year on year. Aberdeen in particular was the European sort of technology centre, a world centre of excellence in terms of innovation in oil and gas exploration and production. And what we're seeing is even fields that maybe were abandoned less than 10 years ago as being no longer viable, those same reservoirs, pockets of oil and gas that were within those areas, They're being exploited now today with some new developments and new extensions to fields. And as innovation has improved, oil that wasn't accessible years ago is now becoming ever more accessible through new technologies being deployed. So it's not going to die out anytime soon. And when we talk about the energy transition, this just transition, there needs to be a gentle tilting of the seesaw away from oil and gas and gently towards renewables. You know, we've seen some renewables projects challenged with supply chain costs and other things being deferred, being postponed, being pushed out to the right. And as the scale of those opportunities perhaps spread out over a longer period, it's even more important that we retain the skills that are there today, the skills within individual craftsmen and women, and the skills within the supply chain companies that are there for us, that want to service oil and gas and want to see gradual opportunities being made available to them within the supply chain for renewables. So there has to be that smooth transition from one to the other. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, so there's some forms of energy that are not going to give us 100% of what we need. And it would be crazy to shut down our oil and gas industry only to find ourselves dependent on expensive foreign imports of gas and hydrocarbon products coming in from overseas. We've got them on our own doorstep, we can develop them with our own people and our own skills, and that's what we should do. That'll give a healthy supply chain in oil and gas for a long period of time, allowing those individuals and those businesses to make that gradual transition into the renewable energy jobs of the future.
That is very clear, and also Alba Party policy, which extends also to what are the people of Scotland going to get to benefit out of this. So perhaps, Steve, you can articulate what Alex said in terms of how the people should benefit from what belongs to them.
Well, in manufacturing, there's the opportunity for literally thousands of jobs. There are millions of tons of steel that need to be processed into the components and the hardware for producing renewable energy, whether that's tidal energy, whether it's offshore wind. And that's one thing he was a strong advocate, this reindustrialisation of Scotland, getting us back to be a global leader in the manufacture of products for energy production. And of course, we're energy rich. We're a country that's awash with natural resources.
Yet fuel poor.
The envy of the world. And yet, I come from the Highlands, I was born there, I've grown up, I work there. You know, we're seeing so much of our area developed, whether that's onshore wind, whether it's the impact of offshore wind projects coming ashore. It's all helping to support, energy security. It's got the capacity to create lots of jobs. It's bringing lots of positive things with it. But of course, people are naturally concerned that they're not seeing their energy prices coming down. It's kind of perverse that in an area that provides so much of the energy that's now going to support the rest of the country, that the people that live there themselves are paying some of the highest prices for energy, and more families are going into fuel and energy poverty. So I think what we need to make sure is that we don't lose the jobs to overseas. We get investment in our supply chain to make sure that we don't miss out on some of the opportunities of the past. This is probably one of the last bonanzas of job opportunities that might come, so we mustn't miss the boat, no pun intended. And at the same time, we need to make sure that communities benefit from that energy. It gets them at a lower price, it helps them with a better standard of living, better prosperity for the future. And at the same time, that development needs to take place in a way that's sensitive and compassionate to the culture of the communities, the landscape of those communities, and mindful of the concerns and some of the anxieties that some of the people have. It needs mature thought, balanced thought to solutions. So we get the jobs, we get cheaper energy, but most of all, we take those communities and people with us in a sensitive and compassionate way.
And of course, a public stake in what we own.
Well, let's take some of the examples. When it was oil and gas, we saw Norway set up a sovereign wealth fund. It's now worth billions of pounds. It's making a big impact in the livelihood of every single Norwegian family. We saw it at the local level, Shetland Council, when oil was coming to their region, their islands, again standing up for the local communities there, setting up a wealth fund that came to be worth several £100 million. And now you only really need to look to Denmark to see how it's tackling some of those same challenges we're facing here. It's got a 20% stake in offshore wind farms and energy projects so that the people can benefit from some of those developments. And at the same time, it's looking at the impact that might have on communities and landscape and areas. And it's made a mandate that high voltage cables over a certain size have to be buried underground. Now, we hear arguments that, oh no, it's too expensive to bury cables underground. But if a country like Denmark can do it, if there's sufficient wealth and turnover and revenue from that sector to be able to fund it, then why shouldn't we stop the blight in the landscape and provide the technology in a way that's sensitive to the needs of the community?
And we've seen successive Westminster government squander away, whether it's Tory or Labour governments, money, leaving Scotland fuel poor in an energy-rich nation, which is why, of course, we seek independence to make those decisions for ourselves. Steve, stay with me, because we're going to speak to you after the break about Ferguson's and indeed your campaign in Cromarty Firth. See you shortly. Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Chisholm. And we've been speaking about some of the motions we've been debating at National Council in Stirling last week. Steve, you spoke very passionately, as we've heard in the first part of the show, about just transition and the oil and gas sector and the requirement, necessity to support those jobs as we transition to renewable energy. But also you spoke about shipbuilding in Scotland and Ferguson's. Speak to me a bit about where you think things have gone wrong and how they can be put right, and how the workers deserve, as you articulated, for government to get it right for them.
Well, I think government's got it spectacularly wrong. I mean, I think nationalising the yard, albeit with good intent, hasn't created the kind of performance and the competence of management that that project deserved to turn it around. At the point in time that happened, that was already a yard and a project in crisis. And what we've seen is, rather than a management team being parachuted in with the competence and the skills to turn that project around and get those ferries out the door in a timely manner, we've seen successive chief executives come in, highly paid bonuses for exceptionally poor performance. And of course, one ferry's been launched exceptionally late and the second ferry not even finished yet. And it's not a reflection of the workforce. The workforce there are as good as any other that exists in the country, and in fact on a global stage. And what has happened is that shipbuilding industry that was once the pride of our nation, respected and revered the world over, has now become, frankly, just a laughing stock. And that could be a real potential barrier to future investment and future opportunities. So to turn that around, the yard needs to have a future. It needs to get into the hands again of somebody with real entrepreneurial spirit and skill, whether that's Jim McCall coming back to take it over again or someone else, but it needs to be taken out of public hands and put into ownership that is focused and competent. And then it needs to get some sustainable orders to prove that the workforce there are capable of working in a competitive manner, building the ships of tomorrow. Because the opportunity, whether it's for more ferries to replace the ageing fleet that's around Scotland, or whether it's to support the offshore wind industry, offshore wind alone, just to service UK and European needs for the next sort of 20 to 40 years, needs 160 service operating vessels. Small, medium-sized vessels that could readily be built at the Ferguson yard could also be built at the derelict yard in Inch Green that's just been held mothballed, doing nothing for us at the moment as a really key national asset. So I think 3 things need to happen. The competence of closing out the remaining ferry needs to improve. You would literally need to work very hard to have a project go as badly as it's done. It's an absolute debacle and a disgrace. But we have to look forward, and that means getting proper entrepreneurial flair, competence back into the management of those key national assets, giving it some sustainability of an early order book to build new ferries and to be able to show its competence to build the fleet that we need for offshore wind tomorrow, and to allow the workers there to shine. The workers there know what they're doing and they need to be trusted. They need to give a platform to prove themselves, and sooner rather than later.
Steve, of course, I'm personally delighted that you are our candidate for Cromarty Firth by-election coming up this coming Thursday. Tell me a little bit about your campaign, promote it, what you're looking for in terms of people to come and support it, and what your plans are if you're successfully elected for the ward.
So for years now, I've been privileged to be involved in a team of people looking to bring industry back into the Highlands, trying to recover the position we had back in the heady days of oil and gas. And we've been successful in that. We've got the first of what hopefully will be a number of new factories already been built, and that's already bringing hundreds of new jobs. In fact, we've been working to secure hundreds of millions of pounds of investment in the area. But you know, something I've learned in the task of that are 2 things that are really important. One is, and Alex Salmond was the real champion of this, it's that the power of people working together across political divides or across different spectrums in the community can achieve so much more. And the team effort that's achieved that inward investment hopefully can be put to play, because it's not all about just creating the jobs. You realise very quickly that for the jobs to be realised, housing needs to be improved. People talk about the state of the roads, the lack of public transport. They talk about the waiting times to get a doctor's appointment, the lack of dentists, all these things. And what I'm looking to do in standing for the council is recognising the huge part that the council is to play. And I feel that somebody that understands the scale and the depth of the opportunity for job creation and the creation of wealth in the region is well placed to have a sensible and mature voice in how all that infrastructure amenity is developed, because the whole opportunity needs to be developed in the round with all those sort of services, whether it's housing, whether it's social care, transport. You can't create the jobs without that balance, and that's what I hope to bring to council.
Now, you've got a very important leaflet. Let's have a look at what it's saying on the front.
So the first thing, of course, is ALBA stands for Scotland, which we do. So I've been a nationalist. I'm a second generation nationalist and proud, and I do feel that Scotland will be better off once all the levers of an independent nation are at its disposal. But in terms of my personal campaign, I would like people that are voting in the ward to see me as somebody that doesn't just listen to the problems, but actually steps up and does something about it. We're trying to do that with industry. Alex Salmond put creating a graduate school of dentistry in the Highlands on the national manifesto for ALBA back in 2024 and asked me to go and get it done. And since then, we've put a working group together. We've got the local university, the local enterprise agency, 2 prominent and well-respected dentists in a working group, working hard, all to build this graduate dental school, because very simply put, if we train dentists in the Highlands, they settle down, they bring up families there, and that increases the availability of oral health care for the Highlands. And that's the type of thing that we just want to keep championing. Taking a leaf out of Alex's book, finding areas where we can make a difference and working to make it happen.
As ever, Alex's legacy lives on and his strategic direction lives on. Thank you so much, Steve. And you're asking everyone to vote Chisholm 1 on Thursday. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks.
Thank you.
And with that, we come to the end of this week's show. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Steve Chisholm as much as I have. Remember, if you live in Cromarty Firth, it's vote Chisholm 1 on Thursday. And I'm going to leave you with a video for the Scottish Parliamentary elections, where we're encouraging everybody who wants independence and wants it now to vote ALBA on the list. So until next week, join me in Glasgow at 10 a.m. on Saturday. But for now, please watch our video on why it must be, and because it makes sense, list vote ALBA. Bye-bye for now.
Here's how the Scottish elections work in 2 minutes. Scotland is split up into 8 regions. Each region has around 9 local constituency MSPs that you vote for using your lilac-coloured ballot paper. This vote is simple. the candidate with the highest vote in each constituency wins the seat. Each region then has to elect another 7 MSPs on what's called the regional list. These 7 are elected using your peach-coloured ballot paper. Here you vote for one party. Each party's votes are counted up and then they are divided by the number of seats that party has already won, plus 1. For example, in 2021, the SNP won 9 constituency seats in the North East. The 148,000 votes they got on the regional list were divided by 10, giving them just under 15,000 votes. The other 133,000 votes were wasted. This meant the SNP did not win a single seat on the regional list in the North East of Scotland. Despite getting the most votes in every region, the SNP only won 2 of 56 regional list seats up for grabs, with unionist parties picking up 46 of them. If, however, SNP voters had decided to back Alba on the regional list instead, the 46 seats won by unionist parties would have been cut to 24. The SNP would have sacrificed just 2 single seats, and in return, the second largest party would have been the pro-independence Alba Party with 30 seats. It would have been an independence supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. In 2026, don't waste your vote. Vote Alba on the regional list.